Ayo stared at the falling snow through the window of her cafe/manga shop. As the sun joined in the beautiful dance, she took a sip of her coffee and hummed a folk song under her breath. As she turned her attention to her to-do list for the morning, she carefully arranged the latest manga shipment on the shelves of Manga and Memories. The sweet aroma of Nigerian chin-chin pastries baking in the kitchen mingled with the scent of brewing coffee. At 28, she had built this little piece of heaven by combining her Yoruba heritage with her love for Japanese manga and Korean culture. Our grandmother had nearly fainted when Ayo announced her plans to move back to Korea and open a manga cafe. After many long discussions over dinner, our grandmother had finally given her blessing and, most importantly, a secret chin chin recipe. Oh, Ayo exclaimed as she noticed the time. She hurried to check on her baking chin chin. Her assistant wouldn't arrive for another hour, and she needed everything perfect for the morning rush. The bell above the door chimed just as she was setting out the fresh pastries. One moment, Jare, she called out cheerfully, using the Yoruba expression without thinking. Take your time, came a deep, melodious voice. Ayo emerged from behind the counter and stopped short. Standing in her doorway was easily the most handsome man she'd ever seen, tall and lean, with elegant features and warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a beautifully tailored navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His presence seemed to fill the cozy space of her shop. Welcome to Manga and Memories, she greeted, watching as surprise flickered across his face at her accent. I am Ayo. How can I help you today? So, Jayon, he introduced himself. I am looking for, he paused, seeming almost embarrassed. Volume 12 of The Garden of Evening Mist. The romance manga? Ayo's eyes sparkled with mischief. My, don't tell me a fancy business executive reads romance manga. Instead of being offended, Jayan's lips curved slightly. And what makes you think I am a business executive? Please. Ayo gestured at his impeccable suit, a stack of bangles jiggling musically. Either you're an executive or you're lost. And you don't strike me as someone who gets lost easily. Guilty as charged, he admitted, though I prefer CEO to executive. Ah, even better, she grinned, leading him towards the romance section. A CEO who reads romance manga. Wait until I tell my grandmother. She's convinced all my manga readers are teenagers. Your grandmother sounds like mine, Jian said, following her through the neat house. She thinks I spent too much time working and not enough time, he trailed off. Finding a partner, having a life outside work, singing, dancing, I supplied playfully. A genuine smile spread across Jian's face. My grandmother says the same thing. Ayo, how will you find a good man buried in these Japanese comic books? She mimicked her grandmother's accent perfectly, then winked at him, though she never specified the man had to be Yoruba. Jayan looked at Ayo with a bewildered gaze and said, You were very sassy, direct, unable to control my mouth. Ayo suggested, reaching for a stepping stool to access the top shelf. Refreshing, he finished, easily reaching past her to grab the manga volume she was stretching for. Show off, she muttered good-naturedly. I suppose being tall comes in handy in the corporate world too. Not as much as you think, he replied, then hesitated before adding, though it might come in handy reaching things for someone who owns a cafe. Over dinner, perhaps. Ayo raised an eyebrow, leading him to the counter. Smooth, Mr. CEO, very smooth. But I don't even know you. You could be terrible at manga analysis. Then maybe we should start with coffee. He gestured to the cafe area. I smell something delicious. Those would be my chin chin pastries. Traditional Yoruba snacks are perfect with coffee. She studied him for a moment. Don't you have some important CEO meeting to rush to? I own the company, he said simply, and some things are worth being late for. Their first coffee date stretched into hours as they sat in the cozy corner of Manga and Memories. The afternoon sun cast warm shadows across their table as he talked. So, why Korea? Jayon asked, reaching for another piece of chin chin. Most manga enthusiasts would choose Japan. Ayo's eyes lit up. Everyone expects Japan. But during university, I fell in love with Korean culture. My grandmother thought I had lost my mind. She laughed, the sound bright and musical. She said, Ayo, You want to leave Lagos to sell Japanese books in Korea. But then she told me something I will never forget. If your heart speaks, listen to it. But pack your common sense in your bags. Wise words, Jane smiled. My irony would say something similar, though she probably had a lecture about finding a suitable partner. Ugh, the marriage agenda, universal grandmother language. Ayo leaned forward conspiratorially. Last week, my grandmother asked if I'd thought that Korean men were handsome. Jayon nearly choked on his coffee. Did she now? Very subtle, my grandmother. Ayo's eyes danced with mischief. Almost as subtle as your irony calling while you're here. He glanced at his phone, which had indeed buzzed several times. She has a sixth sense for these things, he said. Their laughter mingled together. The atmosphere was comfortable and warm. Over the next few weeks, Jiyeon became a regular at Manga and Memories. He'd arrive at different times, always impeccably dressed, but now with a softness to his corporate armor. He picked up some words like Ekaro and Odabo from Ayo, and she smiled, seeing him learning her language. You see, there is nothing I can't learn, he bragged to her, and she had to admit the man was a fast learner. For their first date, he took her to a high-end Korean restaurant where Ayo impressed him by eating the spiciest dishes without flinching. Yoruba pepper is not for the faint-hearted, she declared proudly. On their second date, he surprised her by cooking Nigerian jollof rice, which he learned from YouTube videos. It tasted terrible. She loved the effort he put in. She leaned closer to give him a peck, but his face was a little close for her. He caressed her face, put his hand under her chin, and lightly pressed his lips against hers. It was only a second, but it felt like an eternity. When he was about to pull away, she pressed her lips against his, and the night melted away. 1 month turned into two. Jayan started keeping a spare suit at her place after an incident involving spilled coffee and an important board meeting. Jayon couldn't believe the last minute problem that crawled up at work. He picked up his phone to call Ayo. Hey you, miss me already? Jayon couldn't help but smile at her teasing nature. I wouldn't be able to make it to dinner, he said with a sad voice. I have some problem to solve here at the company, and everyone has to work overtime. Oh, replied Ayo. Then a light bulb went off in her head. Well, if Muhammad can't come to the mountain will have to come to Muhammad. What? Jayon said. I don't understand. Ugh, Ayo sighed. Dear Mr. CEO, it means I will bring you dinner and my beautiful self. Oh, Jayon said. I would love to have you here. Aya got ready. She decided it would be wrong if she only brought food for the boss. So she made a huge order and was told the food would be delivered to the office. But she would personally deliver their dinner. As she entered, she was greeted by his employees. This wasn't the first time she came around. They thanked her for the dinner, which they were already digging into. She smiled at them. As her eyes caught a familiar figure, she couldn't believe it. Sokyung, she called out to him. They both had a big smile on their faces. She went in for a hug. It was short and sweet, but the atmosphere in the office changed. Everyone went silent. If a pin dropped, you could hear it. But Ayo and Sokyung were oblivious to the change. They continued to chat about university and all the antics they were up to. Jayon wondered what the ruckus was, so he opened the curtain to his office to reveal a see-through window. He looked down where his employees were gathered and saw Ayo. She took his breath away. Her face morphed into a surprise at the person she was looking at. He followed her gaze, but he couldn't see the figure clearly. But he definitely saw her hugging him. His eyes stared daggers into the man who she was hugging. The worst part was she was oblivious to his burning gaze. Ayo felt weirdly, and it wasn't because she was talking to her school friend. She shrugged it off and said her goodbyes and headed to meet Jayon. Jayon gave Ayo a dead glare and a childish pout the moment she entered his office. So, who's the guy? He asked nonchalantly, yet he was staring at her deeply. Oh, it was my chingu from university. Oh, really? I didn't know chingus hugged that tightly and for that long, he probed. Opa, sit down and eat, Ayo said in a soft voice. Jayan was taken by surprise. He didn't expect her to call him that. His expression softened. What did you just say? Hmm? Ayo said in return, feigning ignorance. He stood up and walked towards her and raised her face to his. Say it again, he said in a velvety voice. Ayo looked at him and whispered, Opa, Opa, Op. And that was the end of his tantrum. He knew she did it on purpose, but at this moment, he couldn't care less about that. Ayo found herself learning how to make Korean food from his grandmother over video calls, while her grandmother sent Jaeon voice notes teaching him Yoruba. Monifere, he practiced one evening, stumbling over the words. What did you say? Aya looked up from the manga she was reading, her heart stuttering. Did I say it wrong? He pushed up his glasses nervously. Your grandmother said it means I love you. You've been secretly learning Yoruba from my grandmother? Ayo stood, moving to where he sat. She says I need to cut you properly. He pulled her into his laps. Is it working? Moni Ferrer, she laughed. You sneaky CEO, she whispered against his lips. At 6 months, they hosted a dinner for both grandmothers over video call. They spoke no common language, but somehow managed to communicate perfectly with their grandchildren acting as translators. Jayon leaned closer to Ayo and said, Did your grandmother just ask when I'm going to make an honest woman out of you? All Ayo gave him was a slanted look and said nothing. But a few weeks later, when Jeon knelt in a cafe, surrounded by volumes and volumes of manga and the scent of chin chin, Ayo, he began, you are my favorite story. Will you write the rest of our chapters with me? She pulled him up, tears sparkling in her eyes. Yes, but on one condition. Anything, he said. Our wedding has to have both chin chin and bulgogi. Deal, he said as he slipped the ring on her finger. That evening, during a four-way video call filled with happy tears and rapid-fire questions involving the planning of the wedding in three languages, I looked at Jayon and knew theirs wasn't going to be a boring story. The end. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think about Ayo and Jayon's story? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.